Alright, so in this video I'm going to show you how you create your histogram. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do on your graph paper is draw your x and y axes. So just draw a line on this side of your graph paper, and the horizontal axis, that's the x-axis, goes on this side. Alright, so we need to choose a scale that will fit all of the values for the x-axis. So the first column is where your the first column goes on the x-axis, the second column or your frequency column goes on the y-axis. For my x-axis, I'm going to choose a scale of, for every centimeter, for every 1 centimeter on my graph paper, I'm going to put 1 unit. I'm going to go up by 1 unit. For my y-axis, I'm going to choose the same scale. So I'm going to specify that this is the x-axis, and on my y-axis, I'm going to choose the same scale, which is 1 centimeter to 1 unit. Okay, so where the two axes meet, that's where you put 0. Then we're going to start putting the numbers on the x and y axis. So I'm putting the numbers on my x-axis now, and I'm going to go up by 1 each for each centimeter. Okay, my y-axis now, I'm going to go up. You don't have to use this scale. You can use any scale. Use the scale that will fit all of these values. I know that all of these values can be found on my mistake here. Your x-axis should have the classes or boundaries. What I meant to put on the x-axis was the class or interval. So the first interval would be 1 to 2. Then the second interval is going to be, alright, let me write it instead. So the second interval is going to be, so that's 1 to 2. Then 3 to 4. And the second interval is 5 to 6. The third interval is 5 to 6. Okay, so this was meant for the y-axis. Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to use a bar to represent each class or interval or each group in the first column. So I'm going to draw a bar, and the height of the bar must correspond to the frequency for this interval. So I'm going to start with the first interval. The bar should stop at 9 on the y-axis because it has a frequency of 9. Now, histograms are not the same thing. It's not the same thing as a bar chart. They're different. Bar charts, you're allowed to have gaps between each bar. For histograms, there should be no gaps. Okay, next interval is 3 to 4. So the height of the bar again should stop at the frequency. The frequency is also 9, so I'm going to draw the top of the bar right here. Alright, the third interval is 5 to 6, and the frequency for that is 1, so the height of the bar should stop at 1. Okay, so now that we've done that, we are going to put a title for our axis. I'm going to label this title H. Sorry, I'm going to title this axis H. Then I'm going to title the other axis, that's my y-axis. Your y-axis is always frequency. So you know you're always going to put frequency on the y-axis. The x-axis, the title you give it depends on what these values are describing. So all of these values, the previous video, all of these values are describing ages. So that is why I put age here. The frequency is always going to go on the y-axis. So this, your y-axis must always have frequency. Okay, the next thing we need to do is to put the title for the entire histogram. So I'm going to put histogram showing ages of newborn babies. And what you can do, just look at the question to tell. If you want to come up with a good title for your histogram, just look at the question. And the question will tell you. Or in other words, you're putting what this data is describing. The data on this histogram is showing the ages of newborn babies. So that is what I'm going to put as the title of my histogram. Okay, your frequency polygon, on the other hand, you're going to need to calculate what we call the midpoint. Now, the midpoint has a special formula. To find the midpoint, it's going to be upper class limit minus lower class limit. So you don't need the midpoint for the histogram. So all of this histogram is done. But since I'm going to draw a frequency polygon on this histogram, I need to calculate the midpoint. The midpoint is for the frequency polygon. So the midpoint, how are we going to calculate the midpoint for the frequency polygon? We're going to use this formula. Sorry, it's not minus, it's plus. Keep putting minus there. Now you're going to subtract. You're not going to subtract, you're going to add the upper class limit to the lower class limit and divide by 2 to find the midpoint. Let me see if I can reduce this font. Alright, maybe that was a little too small. Alright, that's a little. Alright, try to increase the font some more. Alright, I think that's visible. So the formula is what you're going to use to calculate the midpoint. And what you can do, you can just create another, you can create another column for the midpoint. So I'm going to add an extra column here. And I'm going to put midpoint. Okay, so you can just add an extra column and put your midpoint. Okay, so we're going to be using this formula for each interval or each class. So the first class is 1 to 2. And to find the midpoint for this class, I'm going to add the upper class limit is the bigger number. So 2 would be the upper class limit, not 1. Plus the lower class limit is the smaller number in this interval, that's 1. And I'm going to divide by 2. And that's 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. Alright, next class or interval, that's going to be 3 to 4. So the upper class limit in this interval is 4. So it's going to be 4 plus. The lower class limit for this interval is 3. So I'm just using the formula to find the midpoint for this class. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to add 4 plus 3, that's 7. 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. Okay, so I'm going to put 3.5 here. And the last midpoint that we have to calculate is for the last interval. So the interval is 5 to 6. The upper class limit is 6 and the lower class limit is 5. So I'm going to add 6 to 5 and divide by 2. That's 11 divided by 2 is 5.5. Okay, so we're using this formula to calculate the midpoint for each interval or each class. Next thing you're going to do, you're going to find these values on your x-axis. Now, on the x-axis, 1.5 would be between 1 and 2 on the graph. So I'm going to put it in the center here. The point should go, the point should match up to the frequency for that interval. So 1.5 has a frequency of 9. So I'm going to put it at 9 here. So it's directly in the center between 1 and 2. The next midpoint is going to go between 3 and 4. That's 3.5. So 3.5 is exactly between 3.4 and the frequency is 9 as well. Alright, next midpoint is 5.5. 5.5 is exactly between 5 and 6. So I'm going to put the point here, and you will notice that it matches the frequency as well. So the point is going to go at 1, has a frequency of 1. The next thing you need to do, after you have plotted all of the midpoints, you are going to use a line to connect your points. And that's basically it. So your frequency polygon must have, and if it's a frequency polygon, if you're only asked for a frequency polygon, you're going to have to change the title. So you're going to change the title to frequency polygon showing ages of newborn babies. Alright, so for your frequency polygon, you're going to calculate the midpoint using this formula, and you're going to find the midpoint on the x-axis, and on your y-axis now, you're going to put your point at the corresponding frequency. So 1.5 is at 5 on the y-axis, 3.5 is at 9 as well on the y-axis, and 5.5 would be between 5 and 6 on the x-axis, but it has a frequency of 1. So that is why I put the point here. After you have plotted all of the points, you use a line to connect all of the points on your graph.